Faith Church, hope you're well. It's Monday, June 14th, and today we are beginning in our daily readings to go through the Gospel of John together. And if you've fallen out of the habit of being in Scripture every day, this is a good time to jump in, kind of make a reset. Going through the Gospels is one of the best ways for us to engage in Scripture, and I would encourage you to jump back in with us. A lot of you are already reading with us. That's great. If you read John 1, it's such a rich passage as all of John is. Got me thinking. It starts with obviously Christ the Word, but then speaks about John the Baptist. He's pretty prominent in this first part of John's Gospel. John the Baptist being Jesus' cousin who was sent to kind of usher the way for Jesus. A couple chapters later, John says something that my older son Noel actually had tattooed on his arm. He's wanted a tattoo for a while. My wife and I were a little resistant, not because we're against tattoos, just because we're against young people putting things permanently on their body that they may some years later regret doing so. But he chose some pretty good words. He quoted John the Baptist on his arm. It says, "He must increase, I must decrease." And that's something that John said, John the Baptist. At one point, some people came to John and said, "Hey, do you realize that a lot of your disciples are going over to Jesus and following him instead of following you? They're becoming his disciples. You're losing influence. He's gaining influence." And his answer surprised him. Essentially said, that's the purpose of it. I came to point the way to him, not to get people to follow me. And that's when he says those famous words. He must increase, I must decrease. And this is what really struck me about reading through John chapter 1. I don't know if I've ever thought about this before, but really if I had to pick a theme for that chapter, it's that Christ is coming to increase and those around him are pointing to him. John, in the very beginning of that famous prologue, it talks about Christ the Word becoming flesh. The Word that had been Christ with God for all time, was God, all things created through him. And then it says John, one named John, came to prepare the way. And it's almost like his whole mission in life, the only purpose of his life really was to point people to Christ. Not to himself, but to Christ. That was why he was created, why he was called. As you read through the chapter, this kind of theme continues. Andrew discovers and finds Christ and sees that he is the Messiah. Immediately he goes and finds Peter, his brother, and points Peter to Jesus. You got to come and see this man. Same thing happens with Philip, who's same experience. He's called by Christ. He realizes who he is, and he goes and he finds his friend Nathaniel. He says, "You got to come and see this man." Points him to Christ. This whole theme of people's lives being used essentially to point people to Jesus, and it just struck me. On Sunday yesterday, Lori in her sermon talked about us being like mirrors. I love that image that our life is like a mirror. A mirror doesn't reflect itself. It reflects that which is beyond it. And that we ought to live in this way. That people look at our lives and they don't see us so much, so we begin to decrease, and our lives reflect Christ. I'd love for you to think today. I've been thinking about, what does that look like? How do I live my life in such a way that I reflect not myself, but reflect Christ? Talking to a friend this weekend, and one thing he said is that when he's with people these days, he likes to ask them this simple question. He'll say, how do you see God in your life? What's God teaching you these days? And a lot of people are first taken back by that question because they hadn't really thought about it in those terms. But as they begin to think about it, they begin to recognize, God is teaching me some things, and I'm experiencing God in this way. And it occurred to me that's one simple way we can do this with each other. Just keep pointing ourselves back to Christ. It's one thing to ask a friend in the church or any friend, "Hey, how's things going?" That's good. We want to care about each other, but you might try framing the question a bit differently. how are you doing? How's God? How are you seeing God in your life? What's He doing in your life? What's He teaching you? It's pointing people back to Christ. Certainly, lots of other ways we can do that, but would encourage you to think about that in your life. How even today on this Monday, how is your life being used to reflect Christ in some way? Really good. I want to encourage you again to read through John 1 today, and to begin for the next several weeks to read through John's Gospel with us. So much in there. It's a powerful account of Christ's life. Quick reminder that tomorrow morning we'll pray together. We have this gathering of prayer on Zoom every Tuesday morning at 7:30 to 8 o'clock. We're going to actually pray through John chapter 1, at least some verses from that to prompt us in our prayers. I think I'm really looking forward to it. And maybe you've never joined us for that time. I would encourage you to do so. You don't have to turn your camera on. You can just be silent if you like. Just be kind of there in the background and pray with us. Or, pray aloud if you like, but either way is good. So wherever you are today, pray that you would sense and know the love of God, who is our Father, and the grace and peace of Christ, His Son, and the unity, the fellowship of the Spirit with you where you are right now. Peace.